The chain-link fence appeared overnight. Thomas Mercer stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips, staring in disbelief at the 6-foot barrier now encircling his backyard swimming pool. The morning sun glinted off the metal links, making the whole structure seem even more imposing and utterly out of place in his meticulously landscaped yard. "What the hell?" he muttered, setting down his mug with enough force to slosh coffee onto the granite countertop. Thomas had lived in the Whispering Pines subdivision for nearly 5 years without incident. His colonial-style home with its cobalt blue door and pristine landscaping had even won the neighborhood's Best Curb Appeal award 3 years running. The swimming pool, a modest but elegant kidney-shaped oasis he'd installed 2 summers ago, had been permitted, inspected, and approved by every relevant authority. Or so he thought. Thomas threw on a pair of loafers and marched outside, the morning air still cool against his skin. The fence wasn't just around his pool. It cut through his yard, separating the pool from his patio and creating an awkward division of his property. More concerning was the heavy-duty padlock securing the gate, a padlock to which he had no key. As he circled the perimeter of this unwelcome addition, he spotted a laminated notice zip-tied to the fence. In bold, officious letters, it read, "Property temporarily secured by order of WHISPRNG Pines HOA. Violation number 347B. Contact HOA office for resolution." 347B. Thomas ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. When God's name is 347B? A throat cleared behind him. Thomas turned to find his neighbor, Diane Wilson, standing at the edge of his property, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Diane wasn't just any neighbor. She was the recently elected president of the Homeowners Association, a position she campaigned for with the intensity of someone running for public office. "Good morning, Thomas," she said, her voice carrying the practiced pleasantness that never quite reached her eyes. Today she wore a crisp white blouse tucked into khaki pants, a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. "I see you've discovered our intervention." "Your what?" Thomas felt heat rising in his face. "Diane, you can't just put a fence around someone's pool in the middle of the night." Actually, Section 347B of the HOA bylaws gives us emergency authority to secure any structure deemed an imminent threat to community safety. She tapped a manicured nail against her clipboard. The board voted unanimously last night. Imminent threat? This pool has been here for 2 years. Thomas struggled to keep his voice level. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, portally disguising their curiosity as they collected mail or watered plants. "I demand you remove this fence immediately." Diane's smile tightened. "I'm afraid I can't do that. We've received concerning reports." "What reports?" "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private." Her eyes flickered to the growing audience of neighbors. "The HOA office, perhaps, say, this afternoon at 2. Before Thomas could respond, Diane's phone chimed. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from self-satisfaction to annoyance. "I need to take this." 2 o'clock, Thomas. Don't be late." She turned on her heel and marched away, already answering her call in that same artificially pleasant tone. Thomas stood there, hands clenched at his sides, staring at the fence that now imprisoned his own swimming pool. Something wasn't right. In 5 years, he'd never had a single HOA violation, not even when his grass grew a half-inch too tall during a 2-week business trip. And concerning reports, what could possibly warrant this extreme measure? As he turned to go back inside, he noticed something floating in the pool, a small object that hadn't been there yesterday. Moving closer to the fence, he squinted to make it out. It was a child's shoe, small, bright pink, bobbing gently against the pool's edge. Thomas felt his blood run cold. He didn't have children. No one with children had been to his home in months. So whose shoe was it, and how did it get there? Thomas couldn't focus on work. The image of that small pink shoe floating in his pool haunted him as he sat at his home office desk, staring blankly at spreadsheets that normally commanded his full attention. The HOA office wouldn't open until noon, which left him with hours to wrestle with increasingly disturbing theories. At precisely 1:45 p.m., Thomas pulled into the parking lot of the community center, a modest brick building that housed the HOA offices, a small gym, and a multipurpose room used for everything from yoga classes to monthly board meetings. He was early, but he couldn't stand another minute of waiting. The HOA office was a sterile space with beige walls adorned with framed photographs of whispering pines in various seasons. A middle-aged woman Thomas recognized as Cindy, the HOA secretary, glanced up from her computer. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her expression uncomfortably sympathetic. "Mrs. Wilson is expecting you. Go right in." Diane's office was twice the size of the reception area, with a window overlooking the community pool, a pool that, unlike Thomas's, remained unfenced and operational. She sat behind an imposing desk, flanked by 2 men Thomas didn't recognize. One wore a polo shirt with the community's landscaping service logo, the other, a rumpled suit that suggested some official capacity. "Thomas, thank you for coming." Diane gestured to an empty chair across from her. "This is Mark Holloway, our groundskeeping supervisor, and this is Mr. Reeves from the county inspector's office." Thomas ignored the offered seat. "I want to know why there's a padlocked fence around my pool and why there was a child's shoe in it this morning." Mr. Reeves cleared his throat. "Perhaps I can address part of that. We received an anonymous complaint about your pool's safety features. Upon inspection, we found that your automatic cover's locking mechanism is faulty and the perimeter alarm system you listed on your permit application appears to be non-operational." "That's impossible," Thomas protested. "Everything passed inspection when it was installed." "I have the paperwork." "Things deteriorate, Mr. Mercer," Reeves said flatly. "The safety measures required by county code must be maintained, not just installed." Something about the man's tone struck Thomas as rehearsed, and the HOA's response to a supposed safety violation is to erect a fence in the middle of the night without any notice. Diane folded her hands on her desk. The emergency action was prompted by more than just the safety violations. There have been incidents. "What incidents?" Thomas demanded. Mark, the groundskeeper, shifted uncomfortably. "On Tuesday, during routine maintenance on the property behind yours, I noticed your gate was open. I saw what appeared to be children in your backyard by the pool. When I called out, they ran." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "That's not possible. My yard is fenced. The gate is always locked and I have security cameras." A sickening thought struck him. "Have you been entering my property without permission, Diane?" Instead of answering, Diane slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts of what appeared to be social media posts, screenshots from a neighborhood parents group Thomas had known existed. "Anonymous concerned parents have reported seeing neighborhood children entering your property when you're at work," Diane said. "And there are rumors about parties." "Parties? I live alone. I work from home 3 days a week. This is absurd." Thomas's voice rose despite his efforts to remain calm. "And it doesn't explain the shoe in my pool this morning." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, Diane spoke, her voice lower than before. "Thomas, last night we received a call from Marjorie Bentley. Her 5-year-old daughter, Lily, has been missing since yesterday afternoon." The air seemed to vanish from the room. "And you think, what, that she was in my pool? That's why you fenced it off? Why didn't you call the police instead of playing neighborhood vigilant?" "The police have been notified," Mr. Reeves interjected. "They'll be conducting a formal investigation. In the meantime, the fence stays." Thomas felt dizzy. This is insane. "I've never met this child. I don't know anything about a missing girl." "Yet her shoe was found in your pool," Diane said, her accusation hanging in the air. "Found by whom?" Thomas challenged. "Because when I left my house last night, there was nothing in that pool. And this morning, there's suddenly a fence and a child's shoe. Who put it there, Diane? Who has access to that lock?" The HOA president's face flushed. "Are you suggesting I planted evidence, Thomas? Because that's a serious accusation." Before Thomas could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor across the street, Eric. "Cops at your house right now." "What's going on, asterisk?" Thomas stood abruptly. "I need to go. But this isn't over, Diane. Mr. Mercer, we have a warrant to search your property in connection with the disappearance of Lily Bentley." Detective Sarah Ramirez held up the document as Thomas pulled into his driveway. Her expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes were watchful, assessing his reaction. Behind her, officers in latex gloves were already combing through Thomas's immaculate garden. "I just come from a meeting where I first heard about this child," Thomas said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I don't know anything about her disappearance. Yet her shoe was found in your pool." Detective Ramirez's partner, a stocky man with a military haircut who'd introduced himself as Detective Mills, emerged from Thomas's garage. "Care to explain that?" "I can't explain it because I had nothing to do with it," Thomas insisted. "Someone put it there the same night they put up that fence. I think I'm being set up." Mills raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation. Any idea who would want to frame you for child abduction?" Thomas hesitated. Pointing fingers at the HOA president without evidence would make him sound paranoid. "I need to check something first. My security cameras should show anyone who entered my property last night." The detectives exchanged glances. "We'd be very interested in seeing that footage," Ramirez said. Inside, Thomas led them to his home office where he accessed his security system. The sleek setup had been a significant investment after his divorce 3 years ago. 4 cameras covering every angle of his property, motion-activated and cloud-stored. It was the reason he felt comfortable installing the pool in the first place. But when he pulled up last night's footage, his stomach dropped. The system showed no recordings between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., precisely when the fence must have been installed. System malfunction? Mills asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Impossible, Thomas said, frantically checking the settings. This is a high-end system. It's never failed before. Or someone who knows your setup disabled it, Ramirez suggested, studying him. You said you think you're being set up? Mind telling us why someone would target you specifically? Thomas took a deep breath. I need to show you something first. He opened a folder on his desktop labeled HOA correspondence and pulled up dozens of emails between himself and Diane Wilson over the past 6 months. What had started as routine communications about community guidelines had gradually escalated into increasingly hostile exchanges. 6 months ago, Diane Wilson proposed that all private pools in Whispering Pines be filled in and replaced with an expanded community aquatic center at homeowners' expense. I led the opposition that defeated the proposal. Thomas pointed to a particularly tense email thread. She's had it out for me ever since. Detective Ramirez leaned closer to read. This said she wanted to use eminent domain to take portions of 8 properties, including yours, for the expansion. Eminent domain, Thomas corrected. And yes, she tried to claim the HOA had that authority. When I proved they didn't, she lost the vote and her pet project. 2 weeks later, she started sending violation notices for ridiculous things. My garbage bins being visible from the street for 10 minutes too long, decorative rocks that were unauthorized landscaping features. It was harassment. Mills looked unimpressed. So you're suggesting the HOA president is framing you for child abduction because you oppose her pool project? That's quite a leap, Mr. Mercer. Before Thomas could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Diane Wilson herself standing at the edge of Thomas' property, surrounded by a cluster of neighbors. She appeared to be giving some sort of impromptu press conference to a local news van that had just arrived. Fantastic, Mills muttered. Nothing like trial by neighborhood gossip. I need to talk to my neighbor across the street, Thomas said suddenly. Mrs. Henderson has a security camera that points directly at my driveway. It would have captured anyone coming or going last night. While Detective Mills went to disperse the growing crowd, Ramirez accompanied Thomas to Mrs. Henderson's house. The elderly woman answered on the third knock, peering out suspiciously until she recognized Thomas. Oh, it's you, dear. What's all the commotion about? Her eyes darted to the detective's badge. Mrs. Henderson, did your doorbell camera record anything unusual at my house last night? Thomas asked, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. Let me check. She invited them in, her living room a time capsule of 1980s decor. I got that camera after someone stole my garden gnomes. Can you believe it? In this neighborhood, the police station hummed with activity as Thomas sat in an interview room, a paper cup of terrible coffee cooling between his hands. After providing his statement, Detective Ramirez had asked him to wait while they pursued several leads. That had been 2 hours ago. The door finally opened and Ramirez entered with a thick folder and a grim expression. Mr. Mercer, we've located Lily Bentley. She sat across from him, her professional demeanor tinged with something that looked like disgust, though Thomas sensed it wasn't directed at him. Is she okay? Thomas asked, genuinely concerned despite the circumstances. Physically, yes. She was never missing. She's been at her grandmother's house in Cedar Ridge since yesterday, a pre-planned visit her mother was fully aware of. Ramirez opened the folder. We've also executed search warrants for both Diane Wilson's home and office, as well as the Bentley residence. She spread several photographs across the table. They showed documents, computer screens, and what appeared to be architectural plans. What we've uncovered is, while the prosecutor called it breathtakingly corrupt, it seems your neighborhood pool dispute went much deeper than aesthetics or community resources. She pointed to one of the photos showing a glossy brochure. Whispering Pines Luxury Aquatic Resort and Spa, a $50 million development project that would have replaced 8 homes on your street, including yours, with an upscale resort complex. The HOA board stood to make significant profits as silent partners. Thomas stared at the images. This is why Diane was so determined to push through that community pool project, to bulldoze our homes for a resort. It gets worse, Ramirez continued. The board attempted to purchase those properties directly but hit a roadblock when you and 2 other homeowners refused to sell. That's when they tried the eminent domain angle you mentioned, which failed because HOAs don't have that authority, Thomas added. Correct. So they moved to Plan C, to value the properties through targeted harassment, making them cheaper to acquire or easier to seize through legal means. She slid forward a spreadsheet. This is their strategic property acquisition timeline. Your name is at the top of the list, Mr. Mercer. Thomas scanned the document with growing horror. It detailed a systematic campaign against him and his neighbors. manufacture HOA violations, anonymous complaints to county officials, deliberate property damage disguised as accidents, and finally, what they called reputation destruction. They were trying to make me look like a child predator, Thomas said, the full picture finally becoming clear. If I were arrested or even just under suspicion, your property values would plummet and they could swoop in with lowball offers, or the bank would foreclose while you dealt with legal issues, Ramirez finished. It's textbook real estate fraud, but taken to a criminal extreme. And Marjorie Bentley was in on this. Ramirez nodded. She's Diane's sister-in-law, recently divorced, financially struggling, and promised a job at the resort once it was built. She agreed to use her daughter in the scheme. What about the county inspector who was at the HOA office, Reeves? Not a real inspector. Former contractor with falsified credentials. Ramirez closed the folder. We've made 4 arrests so far, including Diane Wilson and Marjorie Bentley. 2 other HOA board members are cooperating with our investigation. Thomas sat back, overwhelmed. I can't believe they would go this far for a real estate deal. $50 million makes people do terrible things, Ramirez said, but using a child as part of the scheme, that's what really disturbed our officers. A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Middles entered looking both troubled and oddly energized. We've got something else, he said to Ramirez. The forensics team found hidden cameras in Mercer's house. Not just 1 or 2, at least a dozen professionally installed. They've been there for months. Thomas felt physically ill. They've been watching me, in my own home. It's worse than that, Mills continued. We found similar setups in the other targeted homes. They were gathering blackmail material on all of you. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. They didn't limit their surveillance to the targeted homeowners. He handed Ramirez a flash drive. Our tech team recovered this from Wilson's home computer. It's a database of compromising footage on nearly everyone in Whispering Pines. HOA board members, city officials, even the management company executives. They weren't just targeting the holdout homeowners. They were securing their position by collecting dirt on anyone who might oppose them. Ramirez paled slightly as she examined the file names. This is why everyone was so afraid of Diane. She had something on all of them. 3 weeks later, the residents of Whispering Pines gathered in the community center, the same building where Thomas had confronted Diane Wilson just weeks earlier. Today, the space was filled with grim-faced neighbors, news reporters, and a contingent of local and federal law enforcement. At the front of the room, Detective Ramirez stood beside Captain Howard at the County Sheriff's Department and Special Agent Kelsey from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Thomas found a seat near Mrs. Henderson, who patted his hand reassuringly. Never trusted that woman, she whispered. Too many clipboards. Captain Howard stepped to the microphone. Thank you all for coming. We know the past few weeks have been difficult for this community. Today, we want to provide a complete picture of the criminal enterprise that was operating within your homeowners association. The lights dimmed and a presentation appeared on the wall screen. The first slide showed Diane Wilson's professional headshot beside a complex organizational chart. What began as an investigation into a fraudulent missing persons report has uncovered one of the most extensive cases of organized corruption we've seen in this county, Howard explained. At its center was Diane Wilson, who used her position as HOA president to facilitate multiple criminal schemes. Agent Kelsey stepped forward. The luxury resort development was just the tip of the iceberg. Wilson and her associates have been systematically exploiting Whispering Pines for nearly 5 years. The slides advanced to show financial documents, property records, and surveillance photos. Their operations included insurance fraud, identity theft, blackmail, money laundering, and wire fraud, Kelsey continued. Using unauthorized surveillance, they gathered compromising information on residents, which they used to silence opposition and extort money or favors. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as residents recognized their own homes in some of the surveillance images. Thomas felt a chill as he realized how many lives had been invaded. The basement discovery was the key to breaking the case wide open, Detective Ramirez said, taking over the presentation. In a hidden room below Diane Wilson's home, we found an extensive archive of surveillance footage, financial records, and most disturbingly, evidence of at least 12 previous attempts to frame residents for crimes they didn't commit. The screen showed a series of redacted police reports. Some of you may remember former residents who left the community under clouds of suspicion. Alleged embezzlement, insurance fraud, even domestic violence accusations. All of these cases have been reopened, as we now have evidence suggesting these individuals were targeted specifically because they opposed HOA initiatives or owned properties the criminal organization wanted to acquire. Thomas thought of several neighbors who had moved away suddenly over the years, their reputations in tatters. It had never occurred to him that their downfalls might have been orchestrated. Most shocking, Captain Howard continued gravely, was the discovery of evidence linking this organization to similar operations in 6 other upscale communities across 3 states. We believe Wilson's group is part of a larger criminal network that targets affluent neighborhoods, infiltrates their governance structures, and exploits them for financial gain. The next slide showed a series of arrest photos: Diane Wilson, Marjorie Bentley, the fake Inspector Reeves, and more than a dozen others, including 3 members of the city council and the CDO of the development company behind the resort project. To date, 22 individuals have been indicted on various charges, Agent Kelsey said. The investigation is ongoing and we expect more arrests. Some defendants are cooperating with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. A hand went up in the audience. What about our homes? The surveillance equipment? All identified surveillance devices have been removed, Ramirez assured them. Our technical team is available today to help any residents who wish to have their homes scanned for additional devices. Another resident stood, and the HOA itself. What happens now? A woman in a crisp suit stepped forward, introducing herself as a representative from the State Attorney General's office. The HOA has been placed under court-supervised receivership while the investigation continues. All recent fines, assessments, and property actions are being reviewed and will likely be invalidated. Once the full extent of the corruption is established, residents will have the opportunity to either elect new leadership or dissolve the association entirely.